Picture this: a child in Berlin in 1923 building a tower out of money. Not pretend money, real banknotes. Bundles of thousands, then millions, then billions of marks stacked like colorful bricks on the living room floor. In the corner, her parents whisper over an empty pantry. The father holds his pay envelope, so fat with notes it barely closes, and yet it can't buy enough bread for the week. On the table lies a letter from the bank. The savings they built over 30 years are now worth less than a tram ticket. Outside, a woman feeds bundles of banknotes into a stove. She has done the math. It is cheaper to burn money than to use money to buy coal. In cafes, chalkboards change every hour. A student buys a cup of coffee for 5,000 marks. By the time he finishes, the next cup costs 7,000. The waiter shrugs and says, "If you want to save money, order both cups at once." And above it all, in the halls of the Reichsbank, presses thunder day and night. Sheets of paper fly through, printed on one side only to save time, stamped and overstamped with ever more absurd numbers. 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. 9 years earlier, 4 marks bought a dollar. By November 1923, a single US dollar costs 4,210 of 500,000 marks, 4.2 trillion. This is the story of what happens when money dies. Not just when prices rise or when people grumble about the cost of living, but when the very idea of money comes apart, when numbers lose meaning, when people stop believing that tomorrow will look anything like today. It is the story of Weimar Germany's hyperinflation, how a rich, educated country slid, almost sleepwalking, into a financial hallucination that reshaped the 20th century. And here's the unsettling twist. It didn't start with chaos. It started with decisions that seemed, at each step, like the easiest way out. Why should we care about a stack of old banknotes and a crisis a century ago? Because at the heart of this story is something we still rely on every day without thinking. Trust. Trust that the number in your bank app means something. That your wage this month will still buy food next month. That saving is smarter than gambling. In Weimar Germany, that trust evaporated almost overnight. The rules flipped. Savers were ruined. Debtors often walked away laughing. Imagine being a school teacher who lived by the book. You save diligently, buy war bonds, pay into a pension. You believe in the state, in duty, in doing the right thing. Then in a few months, every mark you ever set aside turns into wallpaper and kindling. Meanwhile, your neighbor borrows recklessly to buy a factory. By the time the loan comes due, he can repay it with money that can't even buy a loaf of bread. He emerges owning coal mines or ships. You emerge owning nothing. What happens to a society when thrift is punished and opportunism is rewarded? When planning ahead becomes a trap? Hyperinflation doesn't just destroy prices. It discredits the stories people tell themselves about effort, fairness, and the future. It teaches them that rules are illusions and institutions are liars. And when the economy teaches that lesson, politics follows. 10 years later, as the Great Depression hit, millions of Germans who had already watched their savings vanish once were hit again by joblessness and bank failures. They didn't just experience a downturn, they relived a trauma. So when men appeared promising strong leadership, national resurrection, and revenge on those responsible for the humiliation, many listened. The path from wheelbarrows of cash to marching boots and burning books is not straight, but it is real. That's why this story matters now, because it shows how quickly a seemingly stable society can lose its grip once the money it runs on stops meaning anything. To understand how Germany ended up here, rewind to 1914. Before World War I, the German mark was as solid as gold, literally. 4.2 marks bought $1, and each mark was backed by gold in the Reichsbank's vaults. Money felt like metal, hard, reliable, heavy. Then war. While Britain and France raised taxes to pay for the fight, Germany chose another path: borrowing. The government unpegged the mark from gold and began financing the war with printed money and debt, reassuring citizens that victory would pay for everything. Victory never came. By 1918, the empire was gone, the debt was immense, and the mark had already slipped. Prices had roughly doubled. People noticed them, but life still functioned. Then came Versailles. In 1921, the Allies presented their bill, 132 billion gold marks in reparations. These weren't payable in Germany's paper marks. They had to be paid in gold or foreign currency. So the new Weimar Republic did the only thing it could think of. It printed more paper marks, sold them for dollars, pounds, and francs, and wired those abroad. Each time it did this, the value of the mark fell. And the lower it fell, the more marks it had to print and sell to get the same amount of foreign currency. A downward spiral began. Yet on the surface, things didn't look disastrous at first. As the mark slid, German exports became incredibly cheap. Factories boomed. Unemployment was low. Foreign visitors marveled. Germany seemed busy, humming, alive. But it was a catastrophic boom. Workers were paid in money that lost value every week. Industrialists sold goods abroad for hard currency and used soft, shrinking marks at home. Resentment grew quietly. The real break comes in January 1923. France and Belgium, furious at missed reparations deliveries, coal, timber, telegraph poles, send troops into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart. They occupy mines, railways, steel mills. Their message is simple. If Germany won't deliver reparations, they will take them. The German government can't fight. Its army is shackled by the peace treaty. So it reaches for the only weapon left. Refusal. Ekin. Passive resistance, they call it. Workers in the Ruhr are told, don't cooperate, don't mine coal, don't load trains, don't help the occupiers in any way. Patriotic? Absolutely. Popular? Very. But there is one brutal problem. If millions of workers are on strike, someone still has to pay them. The Ruhr also stops sending taxes. Output collapses just as the wage bill explodes. Where does the government get the money? It prints it. Suddenly, the slow-burning fire of inflation turns into a flashover. Too much money chasing too few goods at a speed the system cannot handle. By early 1923, the dollar cost 17,000 marks. By August, more than 4 million. In October, over 25 billion. In November, more than 4 trillion. The graph doesn't slope anymore, it goes vertical. Inside the Reichsbank, the machinery strains. Paper mills work around the clock. Printing firms hammer out notes day and night. They start printing only on one side. They stamp old notes with new values. 1,000 becomes 1 billion with a red overprint. Even this desperate recycling can't keep up. But the real accelerant isn't just printing, it's behavior. As people watch prices rising, they stop holding money. The moment wages hit their hands, they spend everything. The velocity of money, the speed at which it moves, explodes. A mark that might have changed hands once in a week now changes hands many times a day. Money becomes a hot potato no one wants to hold even for an hour. The faster people try to get rid of marks, the less those marks are worth. Confidence collapses, and with it, the meaning of numbers themselves. Bank clerks and bookkeepers develop something doctors start calling zero stroke. Day after day, they write strings of zeros, millions, billions, trillions, until something in their minds snaps. They become dizzy, confused. They scribble endless zeros across ledgers. They joke, or maybe not, that they'd like a billion cups of coffee. Language breaks. Millionaire, once a mark of wealth, comes to describe someone barely scraping by. Billion sounds pathetic. Numbers stop being anchors and become noise. On the streets, normal life disintegrates in strange, vivid ways. Payday becomes a race against time. At factories, sirens sound not for air raids, but for wages. A truck backs up to the gate, sagging under sacks of cash. Workers crowd forward. Their wives and children wait outside, tense and ready. Notes are counted out in fat bundles. The workers grab them and immediately hurl them over the fence. Their families catch them and sprint toward the shops, desperate to buy bread, soap, anything at all, before the shopkeepers change the chalkboards again. Shops open for a few hours, then shutter to recalculate prices. Doctors stop quoting fees in marks. They ask for eggs, coal, sausages. Farmers hesitate to bring produce to town. Why trade real potatoes for melting paper? Barter returns, a haircut for 2 eggs, a sack of flour for a carpet. The modern industrial economy shrinks down into a medieval marketplace. City dwellers board trains to the countryside with suitcases full of family heirlooms, jewelry and linen, coming back, if they're lucky, with potatoes and black bread. These hamster trips, named after hoarding hamsters, leave everyone feeling humiliated. Cigarettes become currency. They're small, divisible, and unlike the mark, don't suddenly lose half their value between breakfast and lunch. In some places, a pack of American cigarettes is worth more than a week's wages on paper. The images from this period feel almost unreal. Children stacking banknotes like toy blocks because the paper is cheaper than wooden bricks. Walls papered with money, literally, because covering a room with 100,000 mark notes costs less than buying wallpaper. A woman in a small kitchen feeding whole bundles of notes into a stove, not out of protest, but because she's cold. And that wheelbarrow story. A man trundles his weekly wages, a mountain of notes, in a barrow to the bakery. He leaves it outside for a moment. When he comes back, the cash lies scattered on the pavement. The wheelbarrow is gone. The container is worth more than the contents. Underneath the absurdity lies something darker. The destruction of the people who believed most in order. Middle-class professionals, the backbone of Weimar democracy, lose everything. The people who saved, who trusted bonds and pensions, find their entire life's work reduced to the price of a newspaper. One retired gentleman, the story goes, withdraws his savings. The clerk hands over a pitiful handful of notes. He uses them to buy a tram ticket and rides the line across the city. One last journey on money that once promised security for decades. Pensioners starve quietly. War widows with fixed stipends can't afford bread. War bonds, sold with patriotic slogans, prove worthless. It feels like a betrayal not just of finances, but of faith. Workers for a moment are strange winners. Their debts evaporate. A mortgage terrifying in 1920 can be paid off in 1923 with a few hours' wages, if the bank will even accept marks anymore. But this relief dissolves as reality catches up. Factories can't plan or price. Trade slows. By the end of 1923, unemployment surges. Then there are the Raffkes, the snatchers. Industrialists and speculators learn the trick. Borrow in junk money, buy real assets. Borrow millions of marks, repay with money that's worth a fraction of a fraction by the time repayment is due. Hugo Stinnes, the inflation king, builds an empire of coal, steel, ships, and newspapers this way. To ordinary Germans, it looks like a grotesque carnival. Honest people ruined, while a grinning few ride the collapsing currency like a surfboard. Resentment seeks faces. Some are industrialists and bankers. Many are foreigners, arriving with dollars and pounds, buying art, furniture, and jewels for almost nothing, living in luxury hotels for the cost of a modest weekend at home. And some targets are chosen by hatred rather than logic. In November 1923, in a poor Berlin district crowded with Eastern European Jewish immigrants, rumors fly that Jews are hoarding welfare payments. A mob gathers. Shops are smashed. People are beaten in the street for looking Jewish. The economy's chaos spills into violence. Old prejudices find new fuel. Then almost as suddenly as it began, the madness stops. By November 1923, the mark is effectively dead. People won't accept it. Prices in trillions are functionally meaningless. Passive resistance in the Ruhr has ended. The political cost of collapse is too high. Into this wreckage steps a new idea, the Rentenmark. There is no gold to back it. Germany's reserves are gone. Instead, the government creates a story. Each Rentenmark, they say, is backed by a slice of Germany itself, by mortgages on farmland and factories, on the soil and steel of the nation. More importantly, there is a hard rule. Only a fixed amount of Rentenmarks will ever be issued. No more unlimited printing, no more zeros. The exchange rate is set, 1 Rentenmark for 1,000,000,000 old marks. 4.2 Rentenmarks for $1. The exact pre-war parity. It's like hitting reset. On paper, nothing magical has happened. No treasure ship has arrived. But something changes in people's heads. They believe enough. They start accepting Rentenmarks. They start holding them, instead of running straight to the baker in a panic. The velocity of money, which had been 17 times the pre-war rate, drops back down. Prices stop racing upward. In some cases, they even fall. The press is slow. The chalkboards stabilize. Men in shops no longer have to climb ladders every hour to erase and rewrite impossible numbers. This is the miracle of the Rentenmark. Technically, it's less about metal or mortgages than about psychology, constraint, and credibility. A clear promise that the runaway printing is over. But there is no miracle for the people who already lost everything. Stabilization means pain. Government spending is slashed. Interest rates rise. Businesses that gorged on cheap credit go under when they must suddenly repay in hard money. Unemployment stays high. The middle class does not get their savings back. War bonds are not magically restored. The pensioner who bought a last tram ride does not rise from the grave. Weimar lives on officially. The Republic has a new currency, new plans, new slogans. Yet something in its social base has been hollowed out. The people who might have been its firmest supporters, the cautious, the educated, the ones who believed in gradual reform, feel abandoned. They remember that the state, when cornered, paid its bills by sacrificing them. So when the Great Depression hits in 1929, this is the Germany it hits. A country where the middle class has no cushion left, where workers have seen their wages destroyed once already, where trust in institutions is threadbare. Mass unemployment, collapsing banks, and political stalemate don't fall on neutral ground. They fall on a society already traumatized by the memory of 1923. In that soil, extremism takes root. Communists promise a new order. Nazis promise a different one, rooted in nationalism, racial hatred, and revenge. Both speak not just to hunger, but to humiliation. Both offer a simple message. The old rules failed you. Let us write new ones. Hyperinflation does not cause dictatorship like an equation. But it does something just as dangerous. It convinces millions that legal, democratic, respectable institutions cannot be trusted to protect a lifetime's work. Look around today, and the echoes are faint but present. Most modern economies will never see anything like Weimar's 4 trillion to 1 nightmare. Central banks know that road now. Laws and institutions restrain the printing presses. The ghost of Weimar hovers over every debate about inflation in Berlin, Frankfurt, and Brussels. Yet the deeper lesson is not about a specific number. It's about that child building a tower from worthless money and the parents watching their plans for the future dissolve into ash. When money works, we barely notice it. It's just the background hum of life. When it fails, it drags everything else down with it. Morality, politics, even language. The Germans of 1923 weren't greedy fools or cartoon villains. They were in many ways ordinary people trapped in a system making desperate, short-term choices, borrow instead of tax, print instead of confront, delay instead of decide. Each choice, on its own, felt like the path of least resistance. Together, they led to wheelbarrows and zero-stroke. So when we tell the story of Weimar hyperinflation, we're not just recounting a bizarre episode of economic history. We're tracing the thin line between stability and absurdity, between a society that believes in tomorrow and one that's just trying to survive until tonight. Money is only paper and numbers. Its real power lies in what we choose to believe about it and in what we're willing to risk or sacrifice to keep that belief alive.